about the importance of having teachers of color for students. But before we do that, want to point out a couple of things, and I want you guys to think about this as you're watching the video. We want to point out why diversity matters, and we know that there is a large body of research that demonstrates the important educational benefits, both cognitive, social, and emotional, for all students who interact with classmates or educators from different backgrounds, cultures, and orientations to the world. In addition, students of color having a teacher with the same race or ethnicity may increase test scores and reduce the likelihood of disciplinary issues. So we know that students of color also benefit from higher teacher expectations and from seeing members of their own race or ethnicity as role models in positions of authority. And then further research has also shown us that when a school prioritizes diversity and strives to create authentic cultural change, the quality of both teaching and learning improves, benefiting everyone, not only students of color. Let's take a quick look at this video, and I would like you to think about this in the context of the schools and the students that you serve. Dr. Butler, I'm not able to hear the sound. Are you able to reshare with sound again?
Teachers of color are underrepresented in the U.S. workforce and leave the profession at a higher rate than their white peers. The primary reasons cited: isolation and a lack of support. But having teachers of color yields positive outcomes for all students. They force classrooms to break down negative stereotypes, help students understand and confront racism, and prepare students to live in a multicultural society. And for many students of color, it can be life-changing. A 2018 study found that Black students who had a single Black teacher were 13% more likely to enroll in college. With 2 Black teachers, that number jumps to 32%. For Black boys, the impact is even more powerful. Having a Black teacher cut high school dropout rates by 39% for Black boys from low-income families. It's not just because they are seeing a role model who looks like them, though the research says that does matter. Compared to their white counterparts, Black teachers have higher expectations for Black students, and they're less likely to perceive Black students as disruptive, inattentive, or unable to do homework. So there's a gap in representation, and it's holding all of our students back. The demographic data reveals the scope of the problem. Nearly 80% of U.S. teachers are white, but a majority of students are children of color. We must do the hard work of addressing the diversity problem in our teaching workforce. Students need to see their own cultures reflected in the adults responsible for their learning.
Thank you. So in context to the state of Wisconsin, this graph that you see here shows a comparison of student enrollment by race, which is our blue columns, and teacher FTE by race, which are our purple columns, for the 2016-2017 school year, which is the most recent publication of the data. What is the significance that we see in this graph? We see that historically marginalized populations of students are underrepresented in having a teacher of color, more specifically, a teacher of color that is their own race. We also see that Wisconsin has the majority of their full FTE teaching staff continuing to be white educators, making up 95% of the teaching population, more specifically white female educators when we disaggregate it further. So we know that there are not the opportunities that we just saw in the video and talked about for students of color at the same rate of students who are white.
Let's take a minute to watch another video and learn a little bit more about what graduation means for our students in Wisconsin, looking at where our gaps are and what we can do to increase our graduation rates.
Graduation is an exciting time. It marks the beginning of a world of opportunities. It opens doors for careers, more achievements, personal growth, respect, and independence. Unfortunately, not all of our students will see this new beginning. Not all of our students will graduate. Statistics from the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction WISE portal show large gaps between two groups in relation to graduation. The first group is based on race or ethnicity. When looking at the 4-year and 5-year cohorts, we can see the different graduation rates for students receiving a regular diploma. One would hope that these would all be fairly close, but as you can see, this is not the case. Wisconsin continues to demonstrate one of the largest gaps in the nation between white and black students in terms of graduation rate. In 2019-2020, Wisconsin demonstrated almost a 24% disparity between white and black graduation. We are seeing improvements in this gap, however, there's still a lot of work to do. Wisconsin also demonstrates a large gap between students without disabilities and students with disabilities. The 4-year cohort Wisconsin continues to demonstrate one of the largest gaps in the nation between white and black students in terms of graduation rate. In 2019,
We'll try one more time.
Wisconsin continues to demonstrate one of the largest gaps in the nation between white and black students in terms of graduation rate. In 2019-2020, Wisconsin demonstrated almost a 24% disparity between white and black graduation. We are seeing improvements in this gap, however, there's still a lot of work to do. Wisconsin also demonstrates a large gap between students without disabilities and students with disabilities. The 4-year cohort shows a gap of over 23%. The 5-year cohort rate is a little better, but still shows a gap of almost 17%. So not only is there a large gap, but many students with disabilities that do graduate tend to take more than 4 years to do so. Almost 8% compared to just over 1% of students without disabilities. 93.1% of students in general education will receive a regular diploma. Unfortunately, only 69.8% of students in special education will receive a regular diploma with their 4-year cohort. Less than 1% of students without disabilities continue beyond 4 years to earn their diploma. In contrast, 13.6% of students with disabilities remain in school up to 7 years to earn a diploma. The 7-year cohort still leaves a discrepancy of 10.5% between students with disabilities and those without disabilities graduating with a diploma. This gap is also reflected when we look at Wisconsin's dropout rates. Our largest gap is again between white and black students. Almost 6 times as many black students drop out compared to white students. Wisconsin also sees higher dropout rates for its American Indian students, Pacific Islander, and its Hispanic students. Almost 5 times, 4 times, and 3 times as likely, respectively. When viewing dropout rates of students with and without disabilities, we see that the number of students with disabilities that drop out is more than twice that of students without disabilities. In comparison, just under 1% of students without a disability will drop out, while 2% of students with disabilities will drop out. So what can we do, and what does this mean? By working together, we can increase our graduation rate for all students. Increasing our graduation rate by just 1% could mean 50 new jobs for our students, an additional $12.4 million in earnings, $2 million in additional federal tax revenue, and $960,000 in state and local tax revenue. 1% could also result in $16.6 million in savings on healthcare, and it could spark the economy with an additional $9.4 million in consumer spending. So yes, graduation can mark the beginning of this great new world of opportunities for our students. We want every child to succeed, college and career ready. You may ask, what can educators do to increase the graduation rate and prepare all students to be college and career ready? There are several evidence-based practices to support students with disabilities in Wisconsin. These include collecting Indicator 14 data annually to monitor college and career readiness of exiters, reviewing the dropout early warning system to identify students who may be at risk of not graduating, completing a graduation rate improvement plan and/or a transition improvement plan to identify areas of need and plan targeted interventions, and tracking individual students through progress monitoring to ensure targeted interventions are appropriate and supporting the student's needs. While we help students work towards their diploma, post-secondary education, career, and independence, we need to look at providing equitable opportunities and closing the gaps. Remember, graduation impacts everyone in our community.
So with this video, I know sometimes this information is really difficult to see and to hear, but it really shows the impact that we have the ability to do and the opportunities that we can take to increase not only outcomes for our students, but also our communities, the health of our students, and so much more. And that was just an example of a 1%. So imagine if we were moving by 2, 5, 10%. So think about some of those things as we go through the rest of the data for Wisconsin. So on this graphic, you'll see special education students by race that are on the side, and then the percentage of special education students by race graduating with their 4-year cohort at the bottom. And when we look at graduation rates in Wisconsin and disaggregate by race, we see opportunities that we can increase outcomes for students with disabilities, and particularly those who are Black, Hispanic, Indigenous, and 2 or more races. So as you can see, Wisconsin continues to have one of the largest gaps between white and Black graduates. And this isn't just the largest gap in Wisconsin, but it's one of the largest gaps in the nation between white and Black students, with a 23% discrepancy rate. So it's something we have to pay attention to and continue to move forward with. So think about how this comes into play for your students that you're serving, and what questions arise for you when you look at this data. Next slide, please. Why are students not graduating in 4 years? In this graphic, you'll see that economically disadvantaged students are not graduating at the same rate as their peers who are not economically disadvantaged. In fact, there are similar gaps between not economically disadvantaged and economically disadvantaged students. And there is with the gap between white and Black students, as noted in our previous slide. So we kind of see a trend between the 2 data points. Next slide, please. Now let's look at special education dropout by race. In Wisconsin, a Black student or American Indian or Indigenous student is far more likely to drop out than their counter white part student. This data also demonstrated a high dropout rate for Latinx students and students of 2 or more races. So what can we conclude by seeing this data as well? And as we look at dropout rates of students who are not economically disadvantaged and students who are economically disadvantaged, we see the same type of trend as we do in our 4-year cohort data, that economically disadvantaged students are also dropping out of school at a higher rate than their counterparts. What thoughts kind of enter your mind as you think about this data and think about students who are economically disadvantaged? And then to understand where this information on the slide is coming from, let's just start with what indicator 14 is. So indicator 14 is the percent of youth who had an IEP that are no longer in secondary education and who have been enrolled in higher education or in some other post-secondary education or training, or competitively employed, or in some other type of employment within 1 year of leaving high school. Responses that do not fit within this previously listed category that I listed above do not count as not engaged. This data is collected through the Indicator 14 survey, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. The Indicator 14 survey is conducted 1 year after a student exits high school to collect data of Indicator 14 post-school outcomes. So marked off in red is comparing exiters who are white with exiters of color. And as you can see, exiters who are 2 or more races, Indigenous, Asian, or Black, are reporting that they are not engaged at a far higher rate than white exiters.
All right, I'm going to jump in and bring us into looking at special education discipline by race. From research of the early warning indicators through the American Institute for Research, as well as project that came out of that, the DPI Dropout Early Warning System, we know that disciplinary infractions are directly tied to a student's risk of dropping out of high school. And this is because it removes students from instruction and it further hinders building relationships between students and teachers. The School Discipline Support Initiative points out that the pipeline to prison refers to school disciplinary policies such as zero tolerance and practices that remove students from learning opportunities, for example, out of school suspension, and other disciplinary infractions that push students out of school and into juvenile and criminal justice systems, increasingly for minor offenses or nonviolent behavior, such as smoking cigarettes, coming to school out of uniform, or using a cell phone. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you is because research and data have indicated that racial and ethnic minorities and students with disciplinary or with disabilities are disproportionately affected by such policies and practices. So we are seeing a school to prison pipeline. The pie chart that you see here is a representation of all reported disciplinary infractions for students with IEPs from the 2019-2020 school year. We can see that the majority of the infractions on the pie chart are coming from students of color, with the largest percentages being Wisconsin's Black students, students with 2 or more reported races, students of Indigenous populations, and Latinx students, respectively. So we know that we are seeing a larger percentage of disciplinary infractions for students who are non-white and for our students who have been historically marginalized. Next slide, please. This graph here shows incident rate by economic status for the 2019-2020 school year. So in this graph, as we're getting these percentages, it's the total count of student incidents divided by the third Friday count or third Friday enrollment in September. This graph shows the rate of incidents that resulted in a disciplinary action divided across the selected group of students. The rate is calculated by dividing the count of occurrences by the enrollment on third Friday, September. This graph demonstrates that students who are impacted by lower socioeconomic statuses are almost 6 times more likely to have a disciplinary incident than students who have a higher socioeconomic status. One thing that we do want to point out, we know that we have shared a lot of data with you today. However, we want you to note that this is to help you set the stage for the work that we are about to engage in and the action steps that we're going to work together to take throughout this series.